Welcome to the Daily Word, verse by verse. Grab your Bibles and follow along as we continue in our study through the Gospel of John. Keep in mind, I'm using the Holman Christian Standard Bible. So if you're using a different translation, the read is different, but the message is the same. We're going to pick up our study in chapter 19. And of course, Jesus has been arrested. And he has been through his first hearing to this kangaroo court at Caiaphas' palace, where they fabricate the charges against him. Then they bring him to Pilate, and Pilate immediately sees there is no basis for charging this man. But the Jews are forcing Pilate to as a political maneuver, to issue a death sentence against Jesus. And Pilate really doesn't want to do that, but he's being forced. Now, again, Pilate realizes, that this is a sham. So he's trying to free Jesus. Now, there's a couple of things here. The Roman government had a very high esteem of citizens' right. If you were a citizen, you had rights. Now, some of the Jews would have dual citizenships. For example, the Apostle Paul, he was an Israelite, but he also was a Roman citizen. Now, Jesus didn't have dual citizenship. In other words, he wasn't classified as a Roman citizen. So therefore, he wasn't necessarily entitled to those rights. Now, had he been a Roman citizen, this trial never would have gotten this far. Now, on the other hand, you just couldn't go and, execute innocent people. But at the same time, Pilate is in a political situation. He's in trouble with Rome. And so he really doesn't want to have an uprising. He can't afford that. And one of the tasks for the governors who reigned over the Israel and Judea region was keep the people under control. The Israelites were trouble. And so Pilate didn't need that. And that's partially why he's going back and forth. His first answer was, remember, just take him and judge him according to your law. And then they said, well, we can't put him to death. So, verse 1 says, then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers also twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head and threw a purple robe around him. And they repeatedly came up to him and said, "Hail, King of the Jews," and were slapping his face. So this is, you see this kind of a abuse, right? They had, and they had every right to do so. There was no appeal. You couldn't say these guys abusing me. And actually, the situation was even more worse than John is even the details that he's not giving us. But the flogging, the crucifixion, the Roman crucifixion, was one of the most cruel and brutal ways of dying under the government hands. Really to date, right? So what they would do is they would, after the trial, this flogging was extremely painful and brutal, because what they would do is they had a whip that had 3 straps to it, and in that it had bits of bones and metal. Now the Jewish law restricted them to only 40 lashes. Well, the Romans didn't have such restriction. They can give you as many as they want. You also have to keep in mind that if they was giving you, let's say, 40 lashes, in reality, because of the 3 straps, they were giving you 120 lashes. And each time they would lay the whip into your back, the bits and bones would lacerate your skin. It was horrible, painful. So, verse 4 says, Pilate went out again and said to them, "Look, I'm bringing him outside to let you know I find no grounds for charging in him. Now Pilate hoped that this would quench their their thirst for blood. Verse 5, then Jesus came out wearing a crown of thorns and a purple robe. And Pilate said to him, here is the man. And when the chief priests and the temple police saw him, they shouted, crucify, crucify. Pilate responded, take him and crucify him yourself, for I find no grounds for charging him. Now, isn't that interesting right here? I find no grounds for charging him, but crucify him. Verse 7, we have a law, the Jews replied, and according to that law he must die because he made himself the Son of God. And when Pilate heard this statement, he was more afraid than ever. So that knowledge for some reason grips Pilate. Verse 9, he went back into the headquarters and asked Jesus, where are you from? But Jesus didn't give an answer. So Pilate said to him, you're not talking to me? Don't you know that I have authority to release you and the authority to crucify you? Verse 11, you would have no authority over me at all, Jesus answered him, if it had not been given to you from above. This is why the one who handed me over to you has the greater sin, meaning the Jews. From that moment, Pilate made every effort to release Jesus, but the Jews shouted, if you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Anyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar. So they're boxing Pilate into a political corner that he really doesn't want to be in. Verse 13. When Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus outside and sat down in the judgment bench in a place called the Stone Pavement. But in the Hebrew Gabbatha, it was a preparation day for the Passover, and it was about 6 a.m. Then he told the Jews, here is your king. But they shouted, take him away, crucify him. Pilate said to him, should I crucify your king? We have no king but Caesar, the chief priest answered. Now, what a thing to say for the Jews, by the way. Now, this was interesting. What a thing to say. Verse 16. So then, because of them, he handed him over to be crucified. Therefore, they took him away. Verse 17, carrying his own cross, he went out to what is called the skull place, which is in Hebrew called Golgotha. Now, one of the things they would do is again, part of the brutal treatment, and then all of this was done to discourage, it was a deterrent to say, you don't want to cross Rome. You don't want to commit crimes. So he probably, what they made him carry was the beam, the cross beam of the cross. And then they would parade him through a narrow street, and the people would yell at him, spit on him. Some people would take pot shots at him, hit him. Some people would pluck out his beard. Verse 18. There they crucified him and 2 others with him, one on either side, with Jesus in the middle. Pilate also signed a letter and put it on the cross. The inscription was, Jesus the Nazarene, the King of the Jews. Many of the Jews read the sign because the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek was the dominant language, the main language of the land. I mean, even Jesus probably spoke Greek. Verse 21, so the chief priests and the Jews said to Pilate, don't write the King of the Jews, but that he said, I am the King of the Jews. And then Pilate replied, what I've written, I have written. Now it's interesting, when they would crucify him, they would nail the charges that the criminals were guilty of. And so basically what Pilate is saying, because he had said 3 times, I find no reason for charging this man. So his only crime, what his charge is, he's the King of the Jews. That's what he's being crucified for, that he is King of the Jews. What a statement here. All right, I'm going to pick it up at verse 23 in the next video, so I'll see you then.